Good morning. Welcome to the first meeting of the Aberdeenshire Licensing Board since the election of the new council in May of this year. My name's Karen Wiles. I'm the clerk to the Aberdeenshire Licensing Board, and together with a team of deputy clerks, administrative staff, supported by a licensing standards officer, and with partners in our statutory stakeholders like police and fire. We're very pleased to be working with you for the forthcoming term of this licensing board. Please note the board meeting is being recorded today and will be published online for public viewing after the meeting. Can members activate their cameras where possible to enable you to join by video? And can all attendees mute their microphones when not speaking? Please don't come in during items unless the convener invites you to do so. Can I confirm that all members have been able to access the papers for today's meeting in advance? Can you give me an indication that's the case?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay, if members wish to speak on any point, please raise your hand using the hand raising function within Teams, or if you've required to dial into the meeting today, you can raise your hand by pressing *5. If any members lose connection or have technical issues during the meeting, please alert one of the deputy clerks by a separate Teams instant message if possible. And support today will be available from Fergus Pirrie, our ICT officer, during the meeting if required. I'll firstly start by taking the sederant. Mr. Stuart Adams.
Present.
Mr. Adams, I understand you haven't had the opportunity yet to complete your mandatory training, so you'll be here in an observer-only status for today.
Understood.
Mrs. Dawn Black.
Present.
Mr. Jeff Crowson.
Present.
Mrs. Marion Ewanson.
Present.
Mr. Jeff Goodall.
Present.
Mr. Trevor Mason.
Present.
Mr. Richard Menard.
Present.
Mrs. Jenny Nichol.
Present.
And I can confirm that there are 2 board vacancies currently. As your clerk, I will continue to seek nominations to those positions during the term of the board. We also have officers in attendance today, as I said, supported by a number of deputy clerks. We also have in attendance Keith Simpson, Sarah Ward, Lisa Godini and Kevin MacDonald from Licensing Standards. And I understand Sergeant Neil Grant from Police Scotland.
Just to say that Sarah Ward and Neil Grant have tendered their apologies for today's meeting.
Ah, I see. Thanks very much, Fiona. The first items, and I'll do this on your behalf, the first items of business for the board are to appoint its board convener and its vice convener. So I'll firstly open by seeking nominations to the post of board convener. See Councillor, Trevor Mason. Mr. Mason, would you like to come in?
Could I nominate Mrs. Marion Ewanson, please?
Is that nomination accepted, Mrs. Ewanson?
Yes, that's okay.
Do you have a seconder? The second hand I saw was Councillor Dawn Black.
Yep, I second that.
Do I have any other nominations? I don't see any more hands. In that case, may I be the first to congratulate Mrs. Ewanson on her appointment to board convener. I'll just proceed to the next appointment to board vice convener, and then I'll hand over the chair to the convener. Can I have nominations to the post of board vice convener? Mrs. Ewanson.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to propose Ms. Dawn Black as vice convener.
Ms. Black, are you happy to accept that nomination?
Yes, I accept the nomination. Thank you.
I would like to second that.
Councillor Menard has seconded that. Do I have any other nominations? I see no other hands. In that case, congratulations, Mrs. Black. You're now appointed as the board vice convener. In that case, I'll offer my congratulations to both and invite Councillor Marion Ewanson to take the chair.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I look forward to being the convener of this new board, and I look forward to working with Dawn Black as our vice convener. I think we'll have a busy time ahead as usual. It's a very interesting part of the council's business, being on the licensing board. It's a role for the councillors outside the normal policy committees, and there's a lot of work, a lot of good work gets done here, and we enjoy the support of some very good officers in the licensing department. With that, I think we can move on to, wait a minute, till I've shuffled this all around. Item 4, which is the, oh no, sorry, 3, declaration of members' interests. Could members please state if they've got any interest to declare? And if you have, please clarify by giving the item number, the nature of the declaration, and whether or not you wish to leave the meeting. Not seeing any indication, no interest to declare. Thank you. Move on to item 4, the equalities resolution. Do you agree the resolution on equalities? Please open your microphones and state if you agree.
Agree.
Agreed.
Agree.
Okay, thank you all.
Agree.
Now, the next item is the approval of minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 20th of April. I am the only member here who attended that meeting. I am happy to accept that minute as a true record. So I think there's only me who can do that at this point. So that would be the minute approved. Moving on to item 6, the adoption of the Statement of Licensing Policy in terms of the Licensing Scotland Act of 2005. The officer who will be taking the report, I think, is Fiona Stewart. Can I ask Deputy Clerk to please introduce the report?
I'll give you a brief overview of the report first, and then I'll bring in Fiona for any detailed questions that the board might have. This is a really key and fundamental document for our board, the statement of your policy. It makes clear to all stakeholders how you intend to deliver the functions of the licensing board in your coming term. The policy that you have before you today was previously adopted by the last board on the 29th of April 2020, and it does have variations that still live on since the boards were 3 divisional boards prior to them coming together as one board in April 2020. It's a statutory requirement that we have this policy, and if you're happy to approve it today, you should note that we will be reviewing it, as we're obliged to do, within the next 18 months. I can hand over to Fiona for any detailed questions you might have.
Are there any questions from members? Chair, I'm not seeing any questions, so in that case I would point the board to the recommendations.
Does the board agree to adopt the statement of policy as attached in Appendix 1?
Agreed.
There,
Agreed.
yes.
Agreed.
In terms of the recommendation 1.2.2, does the board agree to have regard to the statement of policy in exercising its functions under the Licensing Scotland Act 2005?
Agreed.
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 In terms of the recommendations at 1.2.3, does the board agree that in respect of Supplementary Policy 4, operating hours, that the policy adopted by each of the 3 former divisional board areas continues to apply in each of those respective areas until reviewed?
Agreed.
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 And in terms of recommendation 1.2.4, does the board note that the statement of policy will be published on the board's website?
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
And in terms of recommendation 1.2.5, does the board note that the statement of policy must be reviewed within 18 months of the local government election, work on which will begin after the summer recess?
Agreed.
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 Thank you. So if you look now at item 7 on your agenda, the adoption of fees chargeable for applications under the Licensing Scotland Act 2005 and the Gambling Act of 2005. And the officer taking us through this report is Lauren Cowie. Lauren, over to you.
I'll pick this up first in the first instance, convener, just to give you an overview. Yes, the board sets fees, although a number of those has no discretion and they're set nationally. So there's a great number of them and they fall within Table A in the appendices. There are some, however, in which you do have discretion and you're asked to adopt those that were fixed previously by predecessor boards. Inflation will be applied. That will be applied to the discretionary fees from 1st April, and there's also coverage in the appendices there for your Gambling Act fees also. And so we're proposing that you adopt these in the same manner as your predecessor boards have done. Lauren is available to answer any detailed questions you might have to ask.
Okay, are there any questions? No. In that case, I would refer you to the recommendations, which are on page 92 of your papers. In terms of recommendation 1.2.1, does the board acknowledge that the majority of fees payable for applications for liquor licenses are set out in Table A, as set out in Table A of the appendix to the report, are set by statute, and the board has no discretion over these fees?
Agreed.
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 And then in terms of recommendation 1.2.2, does the board agree to adopt the fees set out in Table B of the appendix to the report?
Agreed. Agreed.
Agreed.
And in terms of recommendation 1.2.3, does the board agree that inflation, as intimated by the head of finance, will be applied to the discretionary fees in Table B of the appendix to the report from the 1st of April on an annual basis?
Agreed.
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 Okay, thank you. In terms of recommendations 1.2.4, does the board acknowledge the statutory fees chargeable for applications for gambling licenses are set out in Appendix 2 to the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
Okay. Moving on to the report on the adoption of procedures for business for the Licensing Scotland Act. And it's over to Karen Wiles, the clerk, please.
Thanks very much, convener. Having approved your policy, it's also good practice to have a number of procedures made clear to applicants and people who will come into contact with the board. So having a number of guidance documents and procedures makes entirely transparent and clear how you would intend generally to deal with business. And so these are important documents so that you can achieve a level of fairness and equity and that people can know what to expect when they bring business before the board. Importantly, in there also are provisions about the virtual operability of the board as well. I'm asking in there also that you delegate authority to myself as clerk to make changes to those as we go through. So as procedures vary over time, if practice grows up, then it's helpful to have that delegation so that we can keep those procedures bang up to date and as applicable as they can be. And of course, they are all available on our website for all to see. So we're inviting you to approve the guidance, the various guidance and procedure documents which we've become used to using for this board and which we commend to you. Today, Fiona Stewart would be able to answer any questions that you specifically have about particular elements of those documents.
Okay, have we got any questions or comments? I could maybe just add then, it is important, I think the delegation is there for any changes, because we've seen how quickly we've had to change our way of working over the last couple of years. So I think it's really important to have the allowance for that delegation in there. Okay, to members, the recommendations are all on page 100. Do we want to go through those, or can we just agree the recommendations as written?
I'd agree as written.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Agreed, yeah.
Agreed as written.
Thank you. Moving on to item 9. The adoption of the Statement of Licensing Principles under the Gambling Act 2005. And again, I'll be handing over to Karen Wiles to introduce the report.
Thank you again, Convener. As you say, these are your Statement of Licensing Principles for the period 22 to 2025 in relation to the Gambling Act. So this is another of your statutory responsibilities, to have a written statement of policy and to have regards to that when you're exercising your functions under the Gambling Act. So another of the fundamental documents that will support the work of the board going forward. Again, we will have this published on our board's website, and we do have ongoing work in developing the local area profile, which is a really important part of this statement, because it really brings applicability on that very local level to how the high level licensing principles will work. Fiona Stewart's our expert in this regard again, and is happy to answer any questions, but otherwise I'd simply be asking you to adopt the statement of policies as attached.
Okay. Any issues, any questions on this? No. Again, I just have a comment that obviously the gambling element of the licensing board, we don't often see applications in front of the licensing board, but it is still important to have this in place. And although there are some concerns about more of the online opportunities that are now available, this doesn't really come under our remit, but I think we need to be aware of the increase in online gambling opportunities. No further comments on that. Again, are we able to agree the recommendations as written, or do we want to go through them?
Agree as written.
Okay.
Agreed.
Agreed as written.
Thank you. Moving on to item 10. Adoption of the scheme of delegation, Licensing Scotland Act 2005 and Gambling Act 2005. And Karen Wiles is going to take us through this, and Lauren is available, Lauren Cowie, for any questions. Mrs. Wiles.
Thank you very much, Convener. Yes, as you know, both in your councillor role and in your members of a licensing board role, the work of the board needs to be discharged timeously, and there's a great deal of detail and operational activity within that, which couldn't all be undertaken by the board members itself. So a scheme of delegation is necessary. There are some aspects of your decision making which must be made by the board and that you'll want to retain for yourselves. There are others that you will wish to delegate to myself and my deputy clerks. And that's really how we manage to make all of the work of the licensing board happen, as I say, timeously and effectively. So this scheme of delegation is put to you both combined in terms of the Gambling Act functions and also your liquor licensing obligations, and it's one that we've found has worked well in the past. Of course, always open to new suggestions or different ways of working in terms of the licensing board's preferences, but what we're putting before you today is a scheme of delegation which we feel reaches a balance between where you as board members will want to be actively and individually involved, and where we as officers can implement your strategic and policy guidance in relation to individual applications. So as you say, Chair, Lauren is happy to answer any detailed questions you have over the scheme of delegation, but I'd simply be asking you to approve it as attached as Appendix 1, and we will of course be publishing that online for all stakeholders to be aware of.
Okay. Do members have any questions, comments?
I would just add to that, Chair, that there is a slight change that we have made as officers to the previous version, because the board didn't have a vice convener until relatively recently. So the wording has been added to the scheme of delegations that we will consult with the convener, whom failing the vice convener if the convener is not available, just so that we've got that transparency in procedure there, and it makes it clear so that the board members know who's dealing with it if the chair is not available. So that's a new addition to the scheme of delegation.
Okay, thank you. Yes, because that came into being sort of part way through the last board. So recommendations are on page 227. Can we agree the recommendations as written there?
Agreed.
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 Great.
Okay. Moving on now to item 11, the approval of equality policy and the outcomes and approval of publication scheme and the guide to information. And again, I'm handing over to Karen Wiles, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. Yes, since the licensing board is a separate legal entity from the council, you're required to have your own equality policy and action plan, and to separately fulfil the obligations of statute in relation to public bodies. So we're putting in front of you our your equality policy and action plan today. Equalities are really vital, particularly when you are dealing with people's livelihoods and their ability to make a living. So the equalities policy and action plan that we're putting before you, one that has been agreed previously, and one that has full regard to the functions that you'll be exercising as a board. We'll be publishing that on the board's website, but we'd also, because this is such an important matter and really integral to the way in which you'll do business, we're asking that you appoint a member of the board to be an equalities service champion for the board. So one member of your board who takes a particular interest. Of course, it's everybody's role to keep equalities at the forefront of their minds, and you'll do that by agreeing the resolution at the beginning of every meeting. But it has been found helpful to have one particular champion. So we do recommend that the board nominate one of its board members to take on that role and really make sure that those equalities obligations that the board have are regularly kept forefront of the minds for board members. In terms of the scheme and guide for information, there's a model publication scheme which is published by the Scottish Information Commissioner, and we're proposing that you agree to adopt that model. which is attached within the appendices. We'd also like authorisation to submit approved documents to the Scottish Information Commissioner for their approval, and that once they're approved, they'll be published. So our obligations in terms of a public body that requires to make certain information available are all satisfied by agreeing those model scheme and undertaking the actions outlined in the report. So I'm commending the recommendations to you, and particularly that appointment of an equality service champion.
Okay, thank you. Is that an appointment that we should make today, Mrs. Wiles?
In theory, yes, but there is time to do it. It's not an onerous task. I'm also an equality service champion because we have to have one at officer level as well. And there will be meetings for equality service champions through the customer services team periodically throughout the year. So you do have time if you're not keen today, but I would urge you, if at all possible, to appoint today, if not as soon as possible, to agree and let me know so that I can feed that into our customer services team so that you don't miss out on any of the training that will be provided for councillors who will be service champions and other, for the council has to have equality service champions as well. So don't want you to miss out on any training. So if you can't agree today, please agree and let me know as soon as possible, please.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Nichol?
If it helps, I'm particularly interested in this one, if that would help with the nominations.
Oh,
If there is someone else that would like to come forward, by all means.
Thank you. A volunteer. Ms. Black?
I would second Ms. Nichol as the champion. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else got any strong intention? Any wishes to take the role? No. In that case, Mrs. Nichol, that's great that you've agreed to do that, and thank you for taking up that position. So that's one of the recommendations dealt with. Recommendations are on page 246, and that was 1.2.4. Are we happy to agree the other recommendations as written?
Agreed.
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 Okay, thank you. Item 12, the annual functions and finance report. This is something you'll see obviously annually on the board. Some of these other things you're only seeing today because it's the first meeting, so we're going through the policies, but this is an important report which will pop up on your agenda annually. So I commend that report to you, and I'll hand over to Karen Wiles.
Thanks very much, convener. Sorry, lost my microphone back there, so I'm really glad that Fiona came in and answered that last question for us. Thank you. I have found my microphone now. Yes, as you say, this is the annual paper that the board will see in terms of that combined functions and finance report, and this one relates to the year just past. It's something that we will be publishing again online, so it's a very public statement of what has been happening in your board area and the financial elements of that as well. So a really important document, one which we're obliged to do in terms of the Licensing Scotland Act. So yeah, if there are any questions, Lauren Cowie would be happy to answer them, but otherwise I just commend the recommendations of the report to you. Oh, there is an error, and maybe that's what Lauren's about to come in and say. There's an error in the number of licensed premises, so I'll bring Lauren in because I think she wants to correct that.
Okay, thank you. Lauren?
Thanks very much, convener and Mrs. Wiles. The report states that there are now 531 licensed premises in Aberdeenshire. However, this is an error that was thrown out by our licensing system, and so when we've gone back and done a double check, and I put out some grateful thanks as well to the licensing standards officers who thought that that figure wasn't quite right and did some work on that for us, and we're actually at 647 premises. So we are substantially higher than where we thought that we perhaps were, and we're actually now back to pre-pandemic levels. So we did have a drop last year. However, there's been a strong recovery in the last 18 months or so. So we seem to be in a better position than where we thought that we potentially were when we first went into the pandemic. I'm happy to answer any other questions. I think that the report shows the amount of work that's gone in the last year. We've had a substantial number of occasional licenses, in part because the outdoor areas and operating were using occasional licenses, and that's why we've had rather high numbers of major variations as premises add that onto their premises licenses. Happy to take any questions, and apologies again for the error in the report.
Thank you for clarifying that. Have we got any questions? Can I just ask Lauren, that 647, can we just confirm that includes premises which are used for a sort of mail order basis, all our microbreweries and gin and rum dealerships that have cropped up during lockdown? That's included in that figure?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. That's total number of premises. So I'll make sure that we get a breakdown as to on sales, off sales, etc., and I can circulate that to the board and make sure that the report is updated before it's published.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you. Okay, so I can take you to the recommendations. We've just got 2 there. So in terms of recommendation 1.2.1, having considered the report, does the board agree to approve the terms of the combined financial and functions report for the year 2021 to 22?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed with alterations, yeah.
Yeah. And the second one, does the board agree to authorise the clerk to publish the document online and provide the Scottish Government with a copy? And obviously that'll be once it's amended. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Now, usually when we see this one, we're at the end of a meeting, but we're not. Item 13, dates of future board meetings. And again, it's Karen Wiles who's going to do this item.
Yes, you're quite right. Conveners normally heralds the end of the business, but you've more to come today. In terms of the coming year, we've suggested in Appendix 1 the dates that you would, what would form a good schedule in terms of conducting the business of the board. And from experience, we would recommend that these board meetings be fixed. What we're suggesting that meantime those continue on the Microsoft Teams platform in a fully virtual format. Although, as you'll know, as councillors in your other role, that we are piloting and continue to work through hybrid committee and hybrid meeting capability. So until we're in a position to offer a good, we haven't yet been able to, in licensing board terms, trial that. We have noticed that the virtual platform has worked very well for the last licensing board, remarkably well, and in fact Aberdeenshire Licensing Board has only ever met in a fully virtual way, because that board was combined from 3 previous divisional boards during the lockdown, April 2020. So what we've found is that a number of applicants have found it is more accessible that way. So there are benefits certainly to the fully virtual platform. However, you also have an important quasi-judicial role there, and you may wish to think about whether that is well handled on a fully virtual platform, or whether there may be occasions on which you would find a hybrid or an in-person solution more appropriate. Meantime, we don't have a hybrid proposal for you to pilot, but we continue to work on that, and we'll continue to come back to the board when we have some options. So meantime, we're recommending that those be fixed on a Microsoft Teams platform, and yeah, I think we can be quite proud of the way in which we've handled the fully virtual experience. We were the first board to be able to do that and to do it successfully, and we're seen as a model of good practice. So you can rest assured that we're in a very good state for Microsoft Teams and fully virtual meetings. So I'll just commend the recommendations to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Do members wish to comment? No. I would just again add to what Karen said on the move to virtual. Obviously there are advantages and disadvantages, but I think especially now that we have an Aberdeenshire wide board, this cuts down on an awful lot of travel. And the other thing is sometimes in the event of a hearing, for instance, the agent might be a representative from completely outside the area like Dundee or somewhere. So it does make it very accessible for people who need to attend the meeting. So it's had some pluses and it does seem to have worked well. Okay, so the dates are on page 380. You'll have had a chance to have a look at those. Hopefully you've also penciled them into your diaries, all ready to go. Are we happy to accept the recommendations?
Yes, agree.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to that we work very closely with committee services in setting board dates for the future, and you will see a further report coming back after recess because we set the board dates in line with the committee calendar. So when that goes to full council, we will have our dates set in draft form and run past the chair and vice chair in advance of that. So there will be a further report coming to you, I would hope, if not August, in October boards for the next committee cycle.
Okay, thank you.
Vina, that concludes the policy business for the board today, and you're now moving on to applications. So as your clerk, I'll take leave of the meeting, if that's all right with board members, and I'll leave you in Fiona Stewart's very capable hands. Thanks very much for a really productive morning so far. I hope you'll go on to have many more very productive licensing board meetings. I look forward to working with you.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. Moving on then to applications for premises or provisional premises licence, non-contentious. So you'll find these on page 386 of your papers. These papers are quite difficult to navigate, I'm finding today, so the page numbers help. It's going to be Fiona Stewart, I think, because Jill is absent today. Hand over to Fiona Stewart.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll take note of the fact that there's no page numbers on the reports, and that we'll get that rectified for the next board agenda. So the first application on page 386 is for Morrison Store north of the A90 at Uri Stonehaven. This is for a provisional premises licence for a new supermarket. Supermarket seeking to trade the maximum hours between 10 till 10, Monday through to Sunday. In respect of the application, the Licensing Standards Officer recommended standard local conditions from our pool of local conditions be attached to the licence. Building Standards had made a comment saying that they couldn't comment because it had not yet been built, but as this is a provisional premises licence, that recommendation is not relevant until the next stage, which is confirmation of provisional premises licence, so they withdrew their comments. And the applicant has submitted the certificate of compliance, and therefore we are recommending that the board grant the provisional premises licence subject to the recommended local conditions and specific conditions as outlined in the board report. With the note that an additional local condition was added relating to delivery of alcohol, removing the requirement for signature, which was we've actually suspended that during the COVID and haven't reintroduced that anyway for reasons due to COVID. And the vulnerability condition was also added in, which the applicant agreed to, which applies to all licenses. So with those additions and amendments, we would seek approval of the application, Chair.
Okay, are members happy to accept the conditions and approve as written, or have we any issues? Any questions? No.
No, I would approve.
Okay, so we just need to note that they have accepted that further local condition.
Yeah, well,
Condition
we'll
19.
make sure
Yeah.
that's reflected in the minute, Chair.
Yeah. And we're happy to approve the application. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Approved.
approved. Yeah.
Okay.
Approved.
Thank you.
Approved.
Okay.
Thank you,
back to
Chair.
you, Fiona.
The next application is for Spar Duthie of Tarvis, and this is for a new premises licence for a village convenience store located in the square in Tarvis, providing a general shopping facility for the community. Again, they're applying for the maximum hours of 10 till 10. The licensing standards officer recommended the local conditions as set out in the report. Building standards confirmed that the alcohol display area was acceptable in terms of layout and capacity. The certificate of compliance has been submitted, and the application is recommended to you subject to the recommended local conditions as set out in the report. You will note there are no specific conditions that apply to this application.
Okay, thank you. Does the board wish to discuss the content of the report or ask any questions? No. In that case, can I just check, and I should have done this with the last application as well, that you've had sufficient evidence to allow a determination to be made?
Yes.
Agreed. Yep.
Yes.
Yes. So in terms of the recommendation at 1.2.2, having determined there's sufficient evidence, should the application be granted or refused? Are we happy to grant? Yeah.
Grant. Yeah.
Grant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Application number 3 is for the co-op at Station Road in Kemney and Inverurie. This is again a provisional premises licence application. It's a convenience store, part of a well-known national chain, selling a broad range of products, and this will include home deliveries of alcohol. It's for off sales only, and it's for the maximum hours 10 till 10, Monday to Sunday. The LSO has recommended the standard local conditions and has recommended additional conditions specific for the delivery of the alcohol. Police Scotland recommended additional conditions relating to delivery of alcohol. The certificate of confirmation has been submitted, and therefore the application is recommended to you for approval, subject to the recommended local and specific conditions as outlined in the committee report.
Okay, thank you. Do members wish to discuss the content of the report, or have you any questions? No. In terms of the recommendation 1.2.1, does the board have sufficient evidence to allow a determination to be made?
Yes.
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 In that case, in terms of recommendation 1.2.2, having determined there's sufficient evidence, should the application be granted or refused?
Granted.
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 Right, we're all agreed that the application will be granted. Moving on to number 4, Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. This is for a new grocery delicatessen business at White's of Newport Sligo in Newport Sligo. It will offer a variety of products, including alcohol for consumption off the premises only. And the applicant is applying for the actual trading hours, which is 10 till 7:30 Monday to Saturday and 12:30 to 2:30 on a Sunday. The LSO has recommended standard local conditions. Planning did query the fact that there was no planning record, but having issued a Section 50 certificate, which is the requirement for the licence, the board can grant the licence. Any issues relating to the state of planning consent will be pursued by planning under planning legislation, and they are already in discussions with the applicant on that. This is a provisional, so there is still work to be done to the premises, and if granted, will come back under delegated authority for confirmation. There are recommended local conditions as set out in the report, and there are no specific conditions recommended in this case. So we're asking the application be granted as per the report.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the recommendation 1.2.1, oh, sorry, have you any questions first of all? No. So in terms of the recommendations 1.2.1, does the board have sufficient evidence to allow a determination to be made?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in that case, in terms of the recommendation at 1.2.2, having determined there's sufficient evidence, should the application be granted or refused?
Granted.
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 Okay, we agree that that application can also be granted.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm then that the board has granted all of the applications set out in that particular report.
Okay, thank you. So now we move on to the at item 15, the applications for major variations, also non-contentious. Fiona?
Chair, these start on page 406 of your papers, and the first application is for the Hatton Market Post Office. As you can see from the report, the applicants are extending their trading hours to the maximum at 10 o'clock, so increasing hours from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week. They are increasing their general opening hours out with the sale of alcohol to 6:30 a.m. till 10 a.m. daily. They've increased their capacity of their alcohol display from 9.6 metres squared to 20.37 metres squared, and they've removed the seasonal variations which state that they're closed on Christmas Day and New Year's Day to enable them to open and trade on those days. The applicant has still to submit the certificate of compliance relating to display of the site notice. You will note the police had no objections. The LSO attended and found the site notice displayed. Building standards agreed with the alcohol capacities as set out in the application. Planning had no comment to make in respect of the application. The applicants have confirmed that they have agreed the recommended conditions as set out in the report. There are no specific conditions, but we are recommending that this application be granted in principle, subject to receipt of the certificate of compliance. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? No. Does the board feel you've had sufficient evidence to allow a determination to be made?
Yes.
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 And secondly, having determined there's sufficient evidence, should the application be granted or refused?
Granted.
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 Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The next application is for a variation at West Hill Service Station, a Strake Road, Elric, West Hill. As you can see from the report, there are no proposed changes in hours, the maximum hours already being in place, 10 till 10. The changes that are being made is to increase the alcohol capacity area from 31.42 metre square to 51.3391 metre square. They're updating their agent's details because they've changed agent, and they've updated their layout plan to show the increased capacity in the alcohol display area, and they've added in the required location of their lockfast store. All alcohol not on display in the premises must be kept in a lockfast store within the premises, and it's a board condition that that be shown on the layout plans, so that has been rectified. The applicant has submitted the certificate of compliance. Police Scotland had no objection, neither did Environmental Health. The LSO made some recommendations in relation to the operating plan and recommended standard local conditions. The operating plan was updated to address the comments made by the LSO and accepted the conditions as set out in the report. There are no conditions that are specific to this application, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Do members wish to discuss the application, or have you got any questions? No. In that case, can I ask that you feel you've had sufficient evidence to be able to determine the application?
Yes.
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 Can we then therefore we've agreed that we've seen sufficient evidence, so should the application be granted or refused?
Granted.
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 Okay, thank you. Application is granted.
Thank you, Chair. The next application is for the Ithenview Hotel at Methlick in Ellen. And you'll see that there are no change in either the on or off sale hours being sought here. What the variation is required for is the addition of an outside drinking area, which has been in operation throughout COVID, operating under occasional licenses. This now seeks to make that a permanent addition to the licence. The outdoor area has an agreed terminal hour of 10 p.m. The certificate of the compliance for the site notice has been submitted. Police Scotland and the LSO recommended local conditions and specific conditions in relation to the outside drinking area. A neighbour had initially objected to the variation, but following discussions with the applicant, realised that it was the area that had been operating under occasionals with no nuisance, no complaints, and was quite happy and withdrew their objection on that basis. The applicant has accepted the recommended local conditions and the agreed specific conditions as set out in the body of the report.
Okay, thank you. Have we any comments or questions? No, it is worth just drawing your attention to the conditions, the standard conditions really that we see for outdoor areas in terms of physical barrier, terminal hour of 2200 hours, signage and no amplified music in the outdoor area. You'll see these as quite standard when we're going through these outdoor applications. Are members content that they've received enough information to be able to determine the application?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
In that case, given that we've had sufficient information, is this application granted or refused?
Granted.
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 Thank you, Chair. So I can confirm that the board have granted all of those applications.
Okay, thank you. That takes us on to our final item today at the early hour of 11:07, agreeing the date of the next meeting. Fiona?
Chair, this will be as approved item 13 on the board papers. So your next meeting will be the 31st of August 2022.
Okay, thank you. Right, can I just confirm now that the meeting has been concluded and the recording will be stopped? So thank you for your interest in this business and your participation in the meeting today.